February 2017 marked a triumphant period in Amelia Rose's life. At 23 years old, she seemed to have it all, everything a young woman could dream of. By day, Amelia was a law student at one of Chicago's top universities. By night, her life transformed into a dazzling spectacle as she performed intricate acrobatic stunts as a cheerleader for the popular basketball team, the Chicago Titans. Her face frequently appeared on promotional posters, and her radiant smile and self-confidence made her a crowd favorite. Friends often described Amelia as an incredibly determined and optimistic individual. She was the kind of person who always believed in herself, even when faced with the toughest challenges. Her dream of becoming a lawyer wasn't just an ambition, it was a plan she had carefully crafted since her teenage years. Beyond her studies and cheerleading, Amelia was actively involved in the team's charity events, where she was warmly welcomed for her sincerity and genuine desire to help others. It was during one such event that she met Richard Blake, a star player in the National Basketball Association. Richard's presence always commanded attention, not just because he was a great athlete, but because of the charisma he exuded. Their introduction quickly blossomed into something more. For Amelia, this new chapter in her life felt like another gift from the universe, affirming her belief that everything was falling into place. But behind the smiles and romantic moments, there was something she couldn't bring herself to share, not even with her closest friend, Lauren. Valentine's Day, February 14th, was supposed to be a special day for Amelia. But when she didn't show up for her morning practice, it immediately raised alarm bells for Lauren, who knew Amelia would never miss a scheduled session without a serious reason. Concerned, Lauren called her multiple times, but received no answer. Her worry grew, and she decided to stop by Amelia's apartment at Skyline Towers, a luxury residential complex overlooking downtown Chicago. The door was ajar. As Lauren stepped inside, she immediately sensed something was wrong. The apartment was in disarray, and the air carried an unusual, unsettling smell. Heart pounding, she walked toward the bedroom, where she found something that would haunt her forever. Amelia lay motionless. Her face was calm, but a single rose beside her and a note that read, "I couldn't anymore," painted a picture of unspeakable sorrow and tragedy. The news of her death sent shockwaves through Chicago. The seemingly perfect life of a rising star had suddenly taken on a shadowy hue. Questions flooded the public consciousness. How could this happen? What was hiding behind the surface of her glamorous life? The investigation was assigned to Detective Henry Cross, a seasoned investigator renowned for his ability to crack even the most complex cases. Within hours, the police uncovered critical leads. Security cameras had captured a man in a dark hoodie entering the building that evening. He appeared confident on the way in, but agitated as he left. The case of Amelia Rose had only just begun, but it was already clear that this was a story that would reveal more than just the end of one life. Themes of fame, ambition, fear, and betrayal began to emerge, setting the stage for an unraveling tragedy. Detective Henry Cross began his investigation by trying to piece together the final days of Amelia Rose's life. He understood that the truth often lay in details that seemed insignificant at first glance. His initial focus was on her friends, colleagues, and loved ones, aiming to uncover who Amelia was beyond her public personas: law student, cheerleader, and crowd favorite. The picture that began to form was far from the perfection it initially appeared to be. Her best friend Lauren, the one who had found her body, described Amelia as a strong and determined young woman who always had a plan and pursued her goals with confidence. But in recent months, Lauren noticed troubling changes in Amelia's behavior. She often seemed exhausted, distracted during conversations, and visibly anxious. Lauren shared that Amelia had mentioned her relationship with Richard Blake, the celebrated basketball player, on a few occasions, though her words were ambiguous. While Amelia was happy to have him in her life, she also expressed frustration over the uncertainty of their relationship. During the search of Amelia's apartment, police uncovered her phone, which quickly became a key piece of evidence. Detective Cross ordered a full analysis of all messages and calls. The phone contained over 200 text messages, many of which were from Richard. While most of the messages had a romantic tone, there were also signs of tension between the pair. The last message, received on February 13th at 10:15 p.m., was from Richard. It read, "We need to talk. I'll be there in 10 minutes." This timestamp placed their interaction dangerously close to the estimated time of her death. Detective Cross also gathered testimonies from Amelia's other friends and acquaintances. Many described how infatuated she had been with Richard, convinced that he would leave his wife, Diana, for her. However, some of those closest to her suspected that Amelia had begun to doubt his intentions. Her open and assertive nature made it difficult for her to accept being kept as a secret in his life. According to Lauren, Amelia had even contemplated going public with their relationship if Richard didn't fulfill his promises. Richard Blake, meanwhile, avoided journalists and refused to cooperate with the police. His representatives claimed he was willing to assist with the investigation, but he remained elusive. His wife, Diana, on the other hand, became more active on social media, posting family photos that appeared to project an image of stability in their marriage. To some, this looked like an effort to maintain a facade of control, as if Diana understood the storm brewing around her husband and was trying to preemptively shape the narrative. At the same time, the police considered other theories about what might have happened to Amelia. One possibility was that she had become the victim of an obsessive fan, as her popularity often attracted unwanted attention. Amelia's social media accounts revealed numerous messages from admirers, some of which were excessively intrusive. However, after thorough investigation, the police found no evidence connecting any of these fans to her death. Surveillance footage from Skyline Towers emerged as a critical element in the case. The video showed a hooded man entering the building at 10:30 p.m., approximately 1 hour before Lauren discovered Amelia's body. His movements were deliberate. He didn't linger, didn't look around, and headed straight for Amelia's apartment. But when he left the building around 11:45 p.m., his demeanor had completely changed. He appeared anxious, his hands buried in his pockets, and his head lowered, as though trying to avoid being noticed by the cameras. Detective Cross reviewed the footage meticulously, searching for any clue that might help identify the man. His instincts told him that this wasn't a random visitor or stranger. This man had a purpose, and most likely, he knew Amelia. Meanwhile, Richard's behavior only added to the growing suspicion around him. The day after Amelia's death, he abruptly canceled team practice, citing exhaustion. During a brief press conference arranged by his PR team, he appeared visibly tense. When asked about his relationship with Amelia, he responded curtly, "I'm not ready to discuss that," before leaving the room. Detective Cross understood that the key to solving the case lay not just in the facts, but in the motives. Who was the man in the hoodie? What secrets were buried beneath the seemingly perfect life of Amelia Rose? And how were they connected to what appeared to be a simple romance between two successful people? It seemed there were more questions than answers, but the pieces of the puzzle were slowly beginning to take shape. The investigation into Amelia Rose's death drew Detective Henry Cross deeper into a web of secrets carefully hidden beneath the surface of her seemingly perfect life. At first glance, everything about Amelia seemed flawless, but the further the police dug, the more cracks began to appear, especially in her relationship with Richard Blake. A pivotal discovery in the case was that their romance had lasted for over a year. Though Richard was married, Amelia believed their relationship wasn't just an affair, but a serious commitment that would eventually lead to a formal union. According to her friends, Amelia was deeply in love with Richard and trusted his promises. He often told her that his marriage to Diana was effectively over, but he needed time to prepare for a divorce. However, as time passed, those promises remained unfulfilled. Amelia was someone who valued clarity. She was used to being in control of her life and achieving her goals. But in this relationship, her sense of control had gradually eroded. Friends recounted how, in recent weeks, she had become more anxious and withdrawn. She often hinted that she wanted change, but seemed uncertain about how to proceed, especially after realizing that Richard wasn't in a hurry to deliver on his promises. During the search of Amelia's apartment, police found a small black notebook where she had written down her thoughts and plans. The last pages were dedicated to her relationship with Richard. One entry read, "I can't wait any longer. I deserve the truth. If he's too afraid, I'll tell everyone myself." These words suggested that Amelia was running out of patience and was ready to take drastic action. Richard Blake, meanwhile, continued to be at the center of the investigation. Security footage confirmed that he had been in the Skyline Towers building on the night of Amelia's death. But his lawyers insisted that he had only wanted to talk to her and had no malicious intent. However, Detective Cross couldn't ignore several crucial details. First, the messages on Amelia's phone revealed growing tension between the two. In one exchange, Richard begged her to leave things as they are and warned her against making reckless decisions. Second, his behavior after Amelia's death also raised questions. Diana Blake, who had previously been active in defending their family image, suddenly stopped posting family photos and avoided journalists entirely. Investigators began to take a closer look at Diana Blake's role in this situation. Her marriage to Richard wasn't just personal, it was also a financial partnership. Diana had essentially managed Richard's career, securing contracts that brought in millions of dollars. The loss of Richard's reputation could not only destroy his image, but also jeopardize their shared financial future. For Diana, this was a matter of survival, and it was clear she wouldn't sit idly by. In Amelia's apartment, police also discovered a flash drive containing screenshots of her conversations with Richard, as well as photos and even a video taken during one of their private meetings. It became clear that Amelia was preparing to use this evidence to expose their relationship if Richard failed to keep his promises. Her notebook confirmed this intention. "I don't want to hide anymore. If he won't hear me, others will." Diana Blake quickly became a person of interest. She had both the motive to protect her husband's reputation and the resources to act discreetly. Still, Detective Cross believed this wasn't enough to accuse her outright. His focus remained on Richard, whose behavior continued to grow increasingly erratic. At a press conference held a few days after the murder, Richard appeared exhausted and irritable. His voice trembled, and his answers to reporters' questions were evasive. When asked directly about his relationship with Amelia, he simply stated, "I'm not ready to talk about that," before abruptly leaving the room. Detective Cross observed him closely and saw more than just fear. His silence about the true nature of his relationship with Amelia became yet another piece of evidence that Richard was hiding something. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to come together. Ambition, deceit, and the desperate desire to protect a reputation seemed to have led to this tragedy. But who exactly had crossed the line and why? Detective Cross knew the answers were closer than they appeared. February 14, 2017, Valentine's Day, a date associated with love and joy for many, became a tragic turning point in Amelia Rose's life. What was supposed to be an ordinary or even celebratory evening turned into the climax of mounting tensions and unresolved conflicts that had been building over the past months. Surveillance footage showed a hooded man entering Skyline Towers at 10:30 p.m. His face was partially obscured, but his movements revealed someone who knew exactly where he was going. He didn't hesitate, didn't glance around, and moved with purpose. Police confirmed that he took the elevator to the 18th floor, where Amelia's apartment was located, and exited the building an hour and 15 minutes later. At 10:15 p.m., Richard Blake had sent Amelia a text message. "We need to talk. I'm on my way." During his interrogation, Richard admitted he had been at her apartment that night, but insisted their conversation had been peaceful and that Amelia was alive when he left. However, the evidence increasingly suggested otherwise. That evening, Amelia had already been pushing Richard for clarity. She wanted him to finally make a decision, divorce his wife and publicly acknowledge their relationship. Amelia could no longer wait, and according to her journal entries, she was ready to take decisive action. Her words, "I don't want to stay silent anymore," indicated that she was prepared to act, even if it meant jeopardizing Richard's carefully curated public image. When Richard entered the apartment, he was a different man. Detective Cross theorized that the confrontation began almost immediately. Amelia demanded answers and a commitment, but instead, Richard pleaded with her not to go public with their relationship. According to psychologists consulting on the case, Richard likely felt immense pressure from the threat of losing his reputation, career, and financial stability. He knew that if the truth about their affair came out, it could destroy everything he had worked for. As the argument escalated, Amelia likely felt betrayed and unwilling to compromise any longer. She demanded that Richard make a definitive choice about their future together, warning him that she was ready to expose the truth if nothing changed. For Richard, this was a breaking point. He understood that Amelia's decision to go public could be the beginning of the end for his career and his life as he knew it. The argument reached a critical and uncontrollable peak. What happened next would lead to tragedy. The aftermath of their conflict was undeniable. Amelia lay lifeless in her room, and Richard left behind a rose and a note. These gestures, the police interpreted, were an ambiguous attempt to convey remorse. Richard's first reaction, according to police, was a mixture of fear, guilt, and despair. He realized the situation had spiraled out of control. Instead of calling for help, he chose to leave the apartment. Before he left, he performed a bizarre act, placing a rose on Amelia's pillow and leaving a note that read, "I couldn't anymore." This was interpreted as an attempt to express emotions that blended regret with a final goodbye. As Richard left the building around 11:45 p.m., surveillance cameras captured his demeanor. He no longer appeared confident as he had when entering. His head was lowered, his hands stuffed deep into his pockets, and his movements were quick, as though he was trying to avoid drawing attention. At that moment, he likely understood that he had destroyed not only someone else's life, but his own as well. Detective Cross pieced together the events of that night from the evidence and testimonies. He understood that this wasn't just a crime, but the culmination of years of pressure, internal conflict, and fear of losing status. A night meant for love had turned into a symbol of deceit, betrayal, and tragedy, forever altering the lives of everyone involved. The investigation into Amelia Rose's death continued. For Detective Henry Cross, this was a case that demanded precision and caution. More and more evidence pointed to Richard Blake's involvement, but it wasn't enough for an official indictment. Cross knew he needed a solid chain of evidence that would leave no room for doubt, neither in court nor in the eyes of the public. One of the key pieces of evidence was a scarf found in Amelia's apartment. A forensic analysis revealed traces of Richard's DNA on it, confirming his presence at the scene during the time of her death. This became the first significant physical link tying him to the crime. However, even with this, his defense team could argue that his presence there didn't necessarily prove guilt or malicious intent. Surveillance footage also played a critical role in the investigation. Recordings from Skyline Towers clearly showed Richard entering the building at 10:30 p.m. and leaving at approximately 11:45 p.m. His behavior on the video appeared suspicious, calm and confident when entering, but visibly nervous and agitated as he exited. To the police, this was further evidence that something significant had occurred during his time in Amelia's apartment. Amelia's text messages were another crucial piece of the puzzle. In particular, her last exchange with Richard revealed growing tension between them. Earlier on February 14th, she had texted him, "You're leaving me no choice." This message signaled to investigators that she was prepared to take drastic action. Richard's reply was equally telling. "Don't do anything stupid. We'll talk tonight." This seemed to be an attempt to stall her, but it also directly tied him to the events of that evening. Another vital discovery came from phone records. Investigators found that after leaving Amelia's apartment, Richard made several attempts to delete text messages from his phone. However, backups of the messages were retrieved from the service provider's servers. This appeared to be a clear attempt to conceal incriminating evidence, further damaging his case. In addition, police gathered testimony from neighbors in the building. One neighbor reported hearing raised voices from Amelia's apartment that night, describing what sounded like an emotionally charged argument. This supported the police's theory that a confrontation had taken place between Richard and Amelia shortly before her death. Detective Cross also interrogated Richard's wife, Dana Blake. Her demeanor was composed but distant. Dinah admitted that she was aware of her husband's infidelity, but dismissed it as a passing episode in his life. She claimed to have had no knowledge of Amelia's intentions to go public with their affair. Diana also mentioned that on the evening of February 14th, Richard had told her he needed to deal with something important. When she asked him to elaborate, he replied that it didn't concern her. This statement added another piece to the growing puzzle. Perhaps the most damning evidence came from Amelia's phone and flash drive. Among the files were photos, videos, and screenshots of private conversations with Richard. One particular video stood out. In it, Richard said to Amelia, "I can't lose this. If you tell anyone, it's over." This statement was a turning point as it revealed that Richard was deeply afraid of the consequences of their affair becoming public knowledge. Gradually, the evidence began to form a coherent narrative. Richard's DNA at the scene, the surveillance footage, the messages, the testimony of neighbors, and Amelia's records all painted a picture of escalating tension that culminated in tragedy. Detective Cross also recognized the psychological weight of the situation. Richard's fear of losing his reputation and career seemed to be the driving force behind his actions. As the investigation progressed, Richard Blake avoided public appearances and interviews. It seemed he was becoming increasingly aware that time was running out. Detective Cross, reviewing the mounting evidence, saw not only a crime but also the unraveling of a man who had been desperately trying to maintain control over his life, but ultimately lost everything. The case was nearing its conclusion, but the full truth had yet to be revealed. The trial of Richard Blake became one of the most talked about events of the year. The media coverage drew widespread attention, not only because of Richard's celebrity status, but also due to the dramatic circumstances surrounding the tragedy. Once a basketball icon, adored by millions and seen as a symbol of success, Richard now sat in the defendant's chair, charged with the murder of a young woman whose life had been full of dreams and ambition. The prosecution argued that Amelia Rose's death was the result of deliberate actions by Richard. The prosecutors claimed that, driven by fear of losing his reputation and career, Richard made a fatal decision. In his opening statement, the prosecutor declared, "This is not just a case about murder. This is a story about how the fear of the truth can drive a person to commit unthinkable acts." The defense, on the other hand, tried to portray Richard as a victim of circumstance. His lawyers argued that the tragedy was accidental, a result of heightened emotions during an intense argument. They maintained that Richard had no intention of harming Amelia and that his actions were impulsive, not premeditated. The prosecution presented a compelling case, supported by hard evidence. Forensic experts confirmed that Richard's DNA had been found on the scarf in Amelia's apartment, directly linking him to the crime scene. Surveillance footage clearly showed Richard entering Skyline Towers at 10:30 p.m. and leaving around 11:45 p.m. during the time frame in which Amelia was believed to have died. However, the most incriminating evidence came from text messages between Richard and Amelia, which revealed the growing tension in their relationship. The final message from Richard, "We'll talk tonight," proved that he had planned to meet her on the night of her death. One of the prosecution's key witnesses was Lauren, Amelia's best friend. Her testimony shed light on the depth of Amelia's involvement with Richard and how much the relationship had impacted her life. Lauren recounted, she truly believed they had a future together, but recently she started doubting his honesty. She often said she couldn't wait any longer. Her words corroborated the theory that Amelia had been ready to expose their relationship if Richard didn't fulfill his promises. Another emotional moment in the trial was the testimony of Amelia's mother, Melissa Rose. She described her daughter as a vibrant, ambitious, and determined young woman with big plans for the future. Her voice trembled as she said, "She was willing to fight it for the truth, even when it was hard. But that fight cost her her life." Her heartfelt words moved many in the courtroom to tears. When it was Richard's turn to address the court, he appeared weary and defeated. His defense team had advised him against testifying, but he chose to make a brief statement. "I regret what happened that night," he said. "I never wanted it to end this way. I can't undo what's been done, and I'll have to live with that for the rest of my life." His words elicited mixed reactions. Some saw them as a genuine expression of remorse, while others viewed them as an attempt to gain sympathy. Ultimately, the jury reached a verdict. Richard Blake was found guilty of second-degree murder, rejecting the defense's claims of accidental actions and impulsivity. The prosecution secured the maximum sentence for the crime, 25 years in prison without the possibility of parole. When the verdict was announced, Richard showed no visible emotion. His gaze remained fixed downward, and he only glanced briefly at his wife Diana, who sat silently in the courtroom. This case left an indelible mark on society. It served as a reminder of how ambition, fear, and deception can lead to devastating consequences. But more importantly, it ensured that Amelia Rose's memory would live on, as her story became a symbol of the fight for truth and dignity. The sentencing of Richard Blake marked the end of his once brilliant, yet tragically tainted career. A man who had once been the embodiment of success, a role model for millions, and a source of inspiration for young athletes, was now remembered not for his triumphs on the court, but for the scandal and crime that had destroyed his life. The lucrative contracts that had made him one of the wealthiest players in the league were quickly canceled. Prestigious brands that had vied for the chance to work with him severed ties even before the trial began, unwilling to associate with the controversy. In the world of professional sports, Richard's name became taboo, whispered with regret or condemnation. His former team, the Chicago Titans, released an official statement cutting all ties with him, and his former teammates avoided making any public comments about him. Fans who once cheered for him now expressed mixed emotions. Social media was flooded with comments of disappointment and outrage. His achievements were erased from official records, and he was stripped of the admiration he had once enjoyed. It seems society was determined to erase Richard Blake from its collective memory. Richard's wife, Diana Blake, also found herself thrust into the public eye. Initially, she had attempted to maintain their family's image and publicly supported her husband. However, after the verdict, everything changed. Her lawyers swiftly filed for divorce, and within weeks their marriage was officially dissolved. Diana retained the majority of their shared assets, including their luxurious suburban home and a significant portion of their financial investments. After the divorce, Diana distanced herself from the sports world and pursued a new career. In an interview with a business magazine, Diana remarked, "Difficult times can break a person, but they can also become the foundation for a fresh start." For Amelia Rose's family, her death remained an unhealed wound, but it also became a driving force for change. Her mother, Melissa Rose, established a charitable foundation dedicated to supporting women in difficult and abusive relationships. Named Amelia's Voice, the foundation quickly gained traction, attracting generous donations and widespread support from the public. The organization provided psychological counseling, legal assistance, and temporary shelter for women in need of safety and support. Melissa Rose became a passionate advocate for women's rights and frequently spoke at public events, sharing Amelia's story. In one interview, she stated, "Amelia always fought for the truth. Her life ended too soon, but her story must be told so that others can find the strength to stand up for themselves." Amelia's Voice also partnered with other organizations dedicated to combating domestic abuse and psychological manipulation. Her story became a rallying cry, inspiring many to speak out about their own struggles. Richard Blake's story, on the other hand, became a cautionary tale. After his sentencing, he faded into obscurity. Once a household name, he was now a man living in the shadows of his former glory. Richard spent his days in prison in near total isolation, refusing visitors and avoiding interactions with other inmates. According to prison staff, he had become a reclusive figure, haunted by the weight of his actions. Attempts by former colleagues to contact him were met with silence. Ultimately, Amelia's legacy extended far beyond the tragedy of her death. Her story became a symbol of strength, resilience, and the fight for transparency. She inspired change not only in individual lives, but also in systemic approaches to addressing abuse and manipulation. In the end, the story of Richard Blake and Amelia Rose became a mirror for society, a reminder of the human consequences of unchecked ambition, deception, and fear. While the pain of Amelia's loss remained, her voice lived on, inspiring a better, more compassionate world where such tragedies might one day be prevented. The story of Richard Blake and Amelia Rose left an indelible mark on society, serving as a stark reminder of how decisions driven by fear or desperation can alter the lives of countless people. It wasn't just a tale of tragedy and loss. It was also a testament to how pain can spark meaningful change and how lessons can be drawn from suffering. Richard Blake's name quickly faded from the headlines after his imprisonment. The immense public attention that once surrounded him dissolved into indifference. His career, once a shining example of athletic greatness, became a cautionary footnote in the history of sports. His achievements were erased from official records, and basketball commentators avoided mentioning his name. The sports world seemed determined to erase his legacy altogether. Richard himself became a shadow of his former self. According to prison staff, he rarely interacted with others and spent most of his time in solitude. His lawyers filed several appeals to reduce his sentence, but all were denied. Each day in prison was a reminder of the choices he made that fateful night, a night that shattered his life and the lives of those around him. His fear of losing his public image had led to a catastrophic decision, leaving him to face the consequences in isolation. Amelia Rose, though no longer alive, became a symbol of resilience in the fight for truth. Her mother, Melissa Rose, worked tirelessly to ensure her daughter's name was associated with positive change. The foundation Melissa created, Amelia's Voice, continued to grow, offering support to women who found themselves in abusive or manipulative relationships. The foundation didn't just provide legal and psychological assistance, it also focused on education and awareness. It organized lectures at schools, universities, and even corporate offices, emphasizing the importance of recognizing red flags in relationships and understanding the value of healthy boundaries. Every event began with Amelia's story, a young, ambitious woman who had the courage to seek the truth but faced immense pressure that ultimately led to her tragic end. Melissa also became a prominent speaker at conferences and on television, using her pain to inspire others. Her speeches were filled with grief, but also hope. "We can't bring Amelia back," she said in one interview, "but we can help others find their voice and the strength to fight for themselves." The story of Amelia and Richard also prompted a broader societal conversation about the moral responsibility of public figures. Many opinion pieces and articles analyze the case as an example of how fame and success can push individuals to hide their mistakes, and how the fear of exposure can lead to devastating consequences. Some journalists coined the phrase the Blake effect to describe the dangers of prioritizing image over integrity and accountability. But perhaps the most profound impact was on ordinary people, particularly women who were inspired by Amelia's story to take action in their own lives. Social media became a platform for sharing stories of empowerment, with many women crediting Amelia's legacy for helping them escape toxic relationships or seek help. "Amelia gave me the courage to say, 'This is enough,'" one woman wrote on the foundation's page. These testimonials prove that even though Amelia's life had been tragically cut short, her voice continued to echo, bringing strength and hope to others. The tragedy also led to tangible changes in how authorities and social services address cases involving emotional abuse and psychological manipulation. Many cities introduced specialized units trained to handle such situations, with the goal of preventing tragedies like Amelia's from occurring again. In the end, the story of Richard Blake and Amelia Rose became more than a crime. It became a mirror reflecting society's values and shortcomings. It underscored the dangers of ambition, unchecked by ethics, the destructive power of fear, and the consequences of living a life built on deception. Amelia's life, though brief, left a legacy of courage and advocacy for truth. Her voice resonated far beyond her years, challenging others to fight for their dignity and not to remain silent in the face of injustice. Richard's downfall, on the other hand, served as a sobering reminder of how easily a life can unravel when one chooses dishonesty and fear over honesty and accountability. For the world, this story became a clear signal of the importance of compassion, transparency, and integrity. Though the pain of losing Amelia would never fully fade, her legacy helped create a world where similar tragedies could be prevented, and her voice would never be forgotten.